The streets of Detroit's west side carried a rhythm all their own, a mix of car horns, distant shouts, and the thrum of bass-heavy music spilling from cracked windows. For 17-year-old Elijah Williams, this symphony was the soundtrack of his life. His neighborhood was far from glamorous, with its graffiti-tagged walls and streets pockmarked with potholes. But to Elijah, it was home. Each crack in the pavement, each corner store with flickering neon signs told a story. It was a place of grit and survival, where dreams often fought an uphill battle against the weight of reality. Elijah had always been different. Where others saw despair, he saw resilience. His mother, a nurse working double shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, often reminded him, "You're bigger than your circumstances, Eli. Don't let this neighborhood define you." Her words stayed with him, a guiding light amidst the shadows of gang activity and the lure of fast money. His father had been absent for as long as he could remember, a void that Elijah felt deeply but rarely spoke about. Instead, he poured his energy into two things: school and basketball. The court was his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the rhythm of the game. His long limbs moved with a grace that belied his upbringing, his quick reflexes honed from hours spent dodging trouble in the alleys of Detroit. Teachers noticed his potential too, calling him the kid with a spark, a rare compliment in a school where many students fell through the cracks. But life in Detroit wasn't without its challenges. Elijah knew which streets to avoid after dark, which faces to steer clear of, and how to keep his head down when tempers flared. He'd seen too many friends get swallowed by the cycle of violence and poverty that gripped their neighborhood. Still, he refused to become a statistic. He clung to the hope his mother instilled in him and the quiet conviction that he was meant for more. One afternoon, as Elijah walked home from basketball practice, the weight of the world seemed to press heavier on his shoulders. The city was alive with its usual chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance, and a group of boys his age leaned against a rusted fence, eyeing him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Elijah kept his pace steady, his gaze forward. "Stay focused," he muttered under his breath, clutching the worn basketball in his hands like a lifeline. It wasn't until he reached the small apartment he shared with his mother and younger sister, Mia, that he allowed himself to exhale. The walls of their home were thin, the peeling paint a reminder of their financial struggles, but it was a space filled with love. Mia greeted him with a wide grin, her homework spread out on the kitchen table. "Mama said dinner's in the fridge," she called out, her voice full of warmth that contrasted sharply with the city outside. Elijah nodded, setting his bag down and heading to his room. The small space was a testament to his aspirations. Basketball posters covered the walls, alongside a framed picture of Donald Trump shaking hands with a group of young athletes. The photo, a gift from his coach, had become a symbol of possibility for Elijah. He didn't care much for politics, but he admired anyone who preached about rising above circumstances and taking control of one's destiny. "Make your own future," the caption under the photo read, and Elijah took those words to heart. That night, as the city outside began to quiet, Elijah found himself staring out the window. The distant lights of downtown Detroit flickered like stars against the inky sky. He felt a strange unease, a sense that change was coming, though he couldn't say whether it was good or bad. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the sound of his mother's voice as she hummed to him in the kitchen. Life in Detroit had taught Elijah to live one day at a time. But deep down, he longed for something greater, something beyond the cracked streets and the weight of unspoken dreams. What he didn't know was that his life was about to take a turn that would challenge everything he thought he understood about the world, about himself, and about what lay beyond the boundaries of this life. Join our community by subscribing to the channel and liking this video. Together, we explore stories that inspire, uplift, and connect us all. Let's grow this journey of discovery and hope. Your support means the world to us. It started as a typical Wednesday evening, the kind of night where the hum of the city's noise began to dim, leaving Detroit cloaked in a restless silence. Elijah had finished his homework, a math problem still lingering in his mind as he grabbed his basketball and headed out to the court 2 blocks away. The court was his refuge, a place where he could drown out the world, and lose himself in the rhythm of the game. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of rain, as he dribbled the ball under the glow of a single flickering streetlight. He moved with precision, each step deliberate, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the asphalt. Basketball wasn't just a game to Elijah. It was his escape, his prayer, his lifeline. He was mid-shot, the ball arcing perfectly toward the hoop, when the sound of tires screeching tore through the quiet. Elijah froze, the ball bouncing to a stop at his feet as he turned toward the street. A black SUV had careened around the corner, its headlights cutting through the darkness like blades. It sped past the court, its engine roaring, before coming to an abrupt stop at the corner of Grant Avenue. For a moment, everything felt suspended, like the world itself had taken a breath. Elijah could see shadows moving inside the vehicle, hear the faint crackle of voices raised in anger. He had seen this scene play out too many times before in his neighborhood. Trouble brewing under the cover of night, the kind of trouble that left scars no one talked about. Not tonight, Elijah muttered to himself, scooping up his ball and turning toward the chain-link fence that bordered the court. He figured it was better to head home than risk getting caught in something he didn't want to be a part of. But before he could take more than a few steps, the sound of a gunshot split the air. The crack was deafening, reverberating through the stillness like a thunderclap. Elijah's heart raced as he dropped to the ground instinctively, the basketball rolling away into the shadows. His mind raced, every instinct screaming for him to stay down, to stay hidden. Seconds felt like hours as he lay there, his cheek pressed against the cold asphalt. He could hear the SUV's tires screeching again, the engine roaring as it sped away into the night. Slowly, cautiously, Elijah raised his head. The street was empty now, save for the faint echo of the vehicle's departure. He thought about running home, about leaving the court and forgetting this night altogether. But something stopped him. A figure lay crumpled near the corner of Grant Avenue, their body half hidden by the shadows of the streetlight. Elijah's breath caught in his throat as he stood, his legs trembling beneath him. He didn't want to go closer, didn't want to see, but his feet moved on their own, each step heavy with dread. The closer he got, the clearer the scene became. It was a boy, maybe a few years younger than Elijah, lying motionless on the pavement. His hoodie was stained dark, the edges of the fabric glistening faintly in the dim light. Elijah's stomach churned as he knelt beside him, his hands hovering helplessly above the boy's body. "Hey," Elijah whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "Can you hear me?" The boy's eyes fluttered open briefly, his gaze unfocused and filled with pain. He tried to speak, but no words came out, only a faint, gurgling sound. Elijah felt a surge of panic, his mind racing for what to do. His phone. He fumbled in his pocket, pulling it out with trembling hands and dialing 911. The operator's voice was calm and steady, but Elijah could barely process their words as he described the scene. "Please send someone fast," he pleaded, his voice cracking. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Elijah stayed by the boy's side, his hands pressing against the wound in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. "You're going to be okay," he said, more to himself than to the boy. "Help's on the way." When the paramedics finally arrived, their movements were a blur of efficiency. They lifted the boy onto a stretcher, their voices calm but urgent as they worked to stabilize him. Elijah stood frozen, his hands and clothes stained with blood, his mind replaying the events over and over. As the ambulance sped away, its sirens wailing into the night, Elijah felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He didn't know who the boy was or if he would survive, but something about the encounter felt profound, as though it had set something in motion that he couldn't yet understand. The night felt heavier than usual as Elijah made his way home, the city's usual noise now a distant hum in his ears. His hands were still trembling, the sticky residue of blood clinging to his skin despite the scrubbing he had attempted at a nearby fountain. The image of the boy on the pavement was seared into his mind, replaying with a vividness that made his stomach churn. The walk back was a blur. Each step felt disconnected, as though he were moving through a dream. When Elijah finally reached his building, the familiarity of his surroundings offered little comfort. The peeling paint on the walls, the flickering hallway light, the faint smell of his mother's cooking. All of it seemed surreal, like a backdrop to someone else's life. Inside, his mother was setting the table, her face lighting up when she saw him. "You're late, Eli," she said, her voice carrying the usual mix of affection and concern. "Dinner's been ready for an hour." Elijah hesitated in the doorway, the weight of the night pressing against his chest. He wanted to tell her what had happened, to let the words spill out and lighten the burden, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? "I lost track of time," he mumbled, forcing a weak smile as he slipped past her into the bathroom. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a moment, the quiet felt suffocating. He stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows across his face. His eyes were wide, his expression a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. The bloodstains on his shirt were faint now, but they were still there, a haunting reminder of the boy he had left behind. Turning on the faucet, Elijah splashed cold water on his face, the sharp chill grounding him slightly. He closed his eyes, taking slow, measured breaths, but even then, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the night's events that weighed on him. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite put into words. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Elijah tried to make sense of what had happened. The memory of the boy's eyes, filled with pain and fear, was impossible to shake. And then there was the strange feeling he had experienced as he knelt beside him. It wasn't just panic or adrenaline. It was something more, a sensation that had left him both grounded and untethered at the same time. Sleep came in fits and starts, his dreams fragmented and unsettling. In one moment, he was back on the court, the ball slipping through his fingers as shadows gathered around him. In another, he was running down an endless street, the sound of sirens chasing him into the dark. But the most vivid dream came just before dawn. Elijah found himself standing in an unfamiliar place, a vast, open field bathed in golden light. The air was warm, carrying a faint hum that seemed to resonate deep within him. At first, he thought he was alone, but then a figure appeared in the distance, walking toward him with purposeful strides. The figure was shrouded in light, its features indistinct yet undeniably human. Elijah felt a strange mix of awe and trepidation as it approached, the light growing brighter with each step. When the figure finally stopped a few feet away, Elijah could feel its presence, as though it were reaching into the very core of his being. "You're not here by accident," the figure said, its voice calm and steady, reverberating in a way that made it impossible to tell whether it was spoken aloud or simply within Elijah's mind. Elijah opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The figure extended a hand, and though he hesitated, something compelled him to take it. The moment their hands touched, a rush of warmth and light surged through him, and the field around them dissolved into a cascade of colors and sound. Images flashed before Elijah's eyes. Scenes of people helping one another, of communities rebuilding after devastation, of kindness and courage pushing back against the darkness. But there were darker images too. Forests consumed by fire, cities crumbling under storms, and faces twisted in anger and fear. "What does this mean?" Elijah finally managed to ask, his voice trembling. The figure's gaze was steady, its tone both comforting and urgent. "You've been chosen to see what others cannot. The choices humanity makes are shaping the future, and every action matters. You must carry this message." Before Elijah could respond, the light intensified, enveloping him completely. He felt himself being pulled upward, the sensation both exhilarating and terrifying. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. He woke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across his room. For a moment, Elijah thought it had all been a dream, but the sensation lingering in his chest told him otherwise. Something had changed, though he couldn't yet say what. Elijah couldn't shake the dream, or was it something more that had come to him in the early hours of the morning? It stayed with him as he went about his day, like a quiet whisper at the edge of his thoughts. School passed in a blur, the noise of the hallways and the hum of lectures feeling distant and irrelevant. He couldn't focus, his mind replaying the words of the figure over and over. You've been chosen to see what others cannot. By the time the final bell rang, Elijah's curiosity had shifted into urgency. He knew he needed answers, but he didn't know where to start. He thought of his mother, who always seemed to have wisdom hidden behind her tired eyes. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Elijah lingered in the kitchen, fidgeting with a stray spoon. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant, "do you believe that people can have visions?" His mother paused, her hands stilling over the pot of stew she was stirring. She turned to face him, her expression soft but thoughtful. "Visions?" she echoed. "What kind of visions?" "Like messages, I guess," Elijah said, struggling to put his feelings into words. "Something bigger than yourself, something that shows you what's real, what really matters." For a long moment, his mother said nothing. Then she reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I think God has a way of speaking to us," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's through dreams, sometimes through people or circumstances. But when he speaks, you listen. It's not always easy to understand, but it's always important." Her words gave Elijah some comfort, but they didn't dispel the weight that had settled in his chest. That night, he returned to his room and opened the small Bible his grandmother had given him years ago. It was worn and faded, the pages soft from years of turning, though Elijah hadn't opened it in a long time. He flipped through aimlessly until his eyes landed on a passage that seemed to leap off the page. "I have set you as a light to the nations, to bring salvation to the ends of the earth." The words struck him deeply, as though they were meant just for him. He closed the Bible, his fingers lingering on the cover, and let the silence of the room wash over him. The dream, the vision, the figure's words, it all began to connect, though he still couldn't fully grasp what it meant. That night, as sleep claimed him once again, Elijah found himself back in the golden field. This time, the figure was already waiting for him, its presence radiating warmth and calm. "You've come back," the figure said, as though it had expected him all along. "I don't understand," Elijah admitted, his voice trembling. "Why me? I'm just a kid from Detroit. What could I possibly do to make a difference?" The figure's light seemed to pulse gently, its tone unwavering. "The world's greatest changes often begin with those who feel small. What matters is not where you come from, but the choices you make. The light within you is stronger than the darkness around you." Elijah felt a lump form in his throat, the weight of the figure's words settling heavily on him. The vision shifted again, faster this time, showing him scenes of struggle and triumph. He saw neighborhoods like his own rising from the ashes, people coming together to rebuild after storms, and leaders standing up for unity in times of division. One image stood out, a group of young people standing in front of the White House, their voices raised in hope and determination. Among them, Elijah saw someone he recognized, Donald Trump, speaking with conviction, his presence a reminder that resilience and belief in a better future could inspire change. Before Elijah could process the image fully, the light began to fade. The figure's voice was calm, but urgent as it spoke one final time. "You've been given this vision for a reason. What you do with it is up to you, but the time to act is now." When Elijah woke, the first rays of dawn were streaming through his window. The sense of urgency hadn't faded, and he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. The question was no longer why me. It was what's next? Before we move to the next chapter of Elijah's journey, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us your name and the city you're watching from in the comments below, so we can give you a special shout out in our next video. Don't forget to like this video and join our growing community. Together, we can share stories that inspire and bring hope. Your support makes all the difference. The weight of the vision lingered as Elijah stepped out into the crisp morning air. The familiar streets of his neighborhood felt different, as though the world itself had shifted overnight. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but everything seemed sharper. The cracks in the pavement, the distant sound of a train passing, the way sunlight danced through the bare branches of trees. He couldn't shake the figure's final words. The time to act is now. But how? How was he supposed to turn a vision into action? Elijah's feet carried him instinctively toward the community center. It was a modest building, its paint peeling and its roof patched together with years of repairs, but it had always been a haven for the neighborhood's youth. Inside, kids played basketball on the worn-out court, their laughter echoing off the walls. A few tables were set up in the corner where older kids worked on homework or played chess. Ms. Ruby, the center's coordinator, greeted Elijah with her usual warm smile. "Morning, Eli. You're here early." "Yeah," he said, shifting awkwardly. "Needed to clear my head." She studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Well, there's always plenty to do around here if you're looking for a distraction." Elijah nodded, grateful for the offer. He spent the next few hours helping to organize supplies, sweep the court, and stack books in the makeshift library. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave him a sense of purpose, however small. As the day went on, he found himself drawn to a group of younger kids who were working on a mural outside. The project had started weeks ago, a way to bring color and pride to the neighborhood, but progress had been slow. Elijah picked up a brush, his hands steady as he added his own strokes to the vibrant scene. One of the kids, a boy no older than 10, looked up at him. "What do you think it means?" he asked, pointing to the mural's centerpiece, a sun rising over a city skyline. Elijah paused, his brush hovering over the wall. "I think it means hope," he said finally. "That no matter how dark things get, the light always comes back." The boy nodded solemnly, his small hands gripping his own brush tightly. For the first time that day, Elijah felt a spark of clarity. The figure's message had been about more than grand gestures or sweeping changes. It was about the small, everyday acts that pushed back against the darkness. Acts like this. Later that evening, as Elijah walked home, he found himself thinking about the mural and the kids who had worked on it. He realized that change didn't have to come all at once. It could start with a conversation, a moment of kindness, or even a few brushstrokes of paint. But the vision still loomed in the back of his mind, its images of chaos and hope intertwined. He knew he couldn't stop with the mural or the community center. There was more to do, more people to reach. When Elijah got home, he sat down at his desk and pulled out a notebook. He began to write, the words flowing as though they had been waiting for him all along. He wrote about the vision, the figure's message, and the urgency of the choices humanity faced. He didn't know if anyone would read it, but it felt important to put it into words, to make it real. As he wrote, an idea began to take shape. Elijah thought about the power of stories, how they could inspire, connect, and bring people together. What if he could share his vision with others, not just through words, but through action? The next day, he approached Ms. Ruby with his idea. "What if we started a project here at the center?" he asked. "Something that brings people together, kids, adults, everyone. A way to show that we can make things better, even if it's just in small ways." Ms. Ruby's eyes lit up with interest. "What kind of project?" "I'm not sure yet," Elijah admitted. "But I think it has to start with people sharing their stories, what they've been through, what they hope for. Maybe if we understand each other better, we can figure out how to make things better together." Ms. Ruby smiled, her pride evident. "That's a big idea, Eli. But I think it's exactly what we need." For the first time since the vision, Elijah felt a sense of direction. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew he wasn't walking it alone. In the weeks that followed, Elijah's idea began to take shape. With Ms. Ruby's help, he started a project at the community center called Voices of Light. It was simple at first, just a series of small gatherings where people could share their stories. Each session brought together neighbors of all ages and backgrounds, their voices mingling like the threads of a tapestry. Elijah was nervous at the first meeting, unsure if anyone would even show up. But as the clock struck 6, the small room filled with people, their faces a mix of curiosity and cautious hope. There was Mr. Johnson, the retired factory worker who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, Maria, a young mother juggling 2 jobs, and even Jamal, the kid who used to tease Elijah on the court, but had shown up with a sheepish grin and a bag of snacks for the group. Elijah stood at the front of the room, his palms sweating as he cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I started this because I believe that our stories matter. They're what connect us, what remind us that we're not alone. And maybe if we can understand each other better, we can find ways to make things better for all of us. The first story came from Ms. Ruby, who spoke about her childhood in the segregated South and how she had come to Detroit with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. Her voice trembled as she described the challenges she faced and the resilience she had found within herself. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. One by one, others shared their stories of struggles, triumphs, and everything in between. Elijah listened intently, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and humility. It was in these moments, as people opened up and found common ground, that he saw the seeds of change being planted. The project grew quickly, spreading beyond the community center. Word of Voices of Light reached neighboring areas, drawing more people who wanted to share and listen. Elijah worked tirelessly, balancing school, basketball, and the growing demands of the project. He felt the weight of it all, but he also felt a sense of purpose that made the long days worth it. One evening, after a particularly powerful session, Ms. Ruby pulled Elijah aside. "You're doing something special here, Eli," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You're showing people that they have a voice, that they matter. Don't ever forget how important that is." Elijah nodded, his chest tight with gratitude. He thought of the vision, the figure's words, and the images of light pushing back against the darkness. This was what it meant to carry that light, to share it, to nurture it, and to let it grow in others. But even as the project flourished, Elijah couldn't shake the sense that there was more to do. The vision had shown him a world on the brink, its future hanging in the balance. He knew the work he was doing in his neighborhood was just the beginning. That night, as he walked home under the glow of streetlights, Elijah felt a quiet determination settle over him. The figure's voice echoed in his mind. "The light within you is stronger than the darkness around you." He didn't know what the next step would be, but he knew he couldn't stop now. The seeds had been planted, but it was up to him and those around him to make sure they grew into something greater. Thank you for being part of our community and for joining us on this journey. We don't earn any money doing this. We do it because we believe in sharing stories that inspire, connect, and uplift. If you enjoyed this chapter, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue spreading these messages of hope and resilience. The months that followed were a whirlwind for Elijah. What had started as a small project at the community center had grown into something much bigger. Voices of Light was no longer just a gathering. It had become a movement. Stories were being shared not only in his neighborhood, but across the city. People from all walks of life were coming together, inspired by the idea that their voices could make a difference. Elijah found himself at the center of it all, a role he hadn't anticipated but embraced with a quiet strength. He spoke at schools, churches, and local events, his words filled with the urgency and hope that the vision had instilled in him. He reminded people of their power to choose love over fear, unity over division, and light over darkness. One evening, as Elijah stood before a packed auditorium, he felt the weight of his journey settle on him. The faces in the crowd blurred slightly, but he could feel their energy, their hunger for something greater. "We are all connected," he said, his voice steady. "The choices we make ripple out into the world, shaping the future. The light is within all of us. We just have to let it shine." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Elijah didn't linger in the moment. He knew this wasn't about him. It was about the message, the vision, and the work that still needed to be done. Back at home, Elijah often found himself reflecting on the figure from his vision and the lessons he had learned. The challenges of his life in Detroit hadn't disappeared, but he no longer saw them as insurmountable. Instead, he saw them as opportunities to grow, to inspire, and to lead. One night, as he sat at his desk, writing in the same notebook where he had first recorded his vision, Elijah paused. He thought of the people who had shared their stories with him, the lives that had been touched by Voices of Light, and the countless others who were still waiting for hope to find them. He closed the notebook and looked out the window, the city lights flickering like stars against the darkness. The road ahead was uncertain, but Elijah felt ready. He had been given a purpose, a mission, and he would carry it forward with everything he had. As he lay in bed that night, he felt a peace settle over him, a peace that came from knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be. Thank you for being part of this journey. If Elijah's story has inspired you, we invite you to continue with us. Click on the next video appearing on your screen. It's going to be revealing and life-changing. Don't miss it. And before you go, please like this video and comment Amen below so the blessings in your life continue to grow. Your support helps us keep spreading light and hope to our growing community.